Good morning, and welcome to the Multicultural Development Center's 13th Annual Diversity Conference, live via satellite. This year's conference is entitled Religion and Spirituality in the Workplace, Creating a Compatible Environment for Spiritual and Religious Values and Practices. Today, we'll be talking about the timely and often controversial issue of spirituality and religion in workplaces, schools, and in institutions throughout the United States. I'm so happy to be a participant in this discussion about a very timely topic, and I'm really pleased to introduce our featured presenter today. Dr. William Guillory is with us. He's a leading authority on diversity, empowerment, leadership, creativity, innovation, and quantum thinking. He speaks on subjects that are at the forefront of our thinking, such as the 7 principles of cultural compatibility, the new leadership for the 21st century, and other related topics involving personal and organizational transformation. Dr. Guillory has written numerous books, including The Living Organizations, Spirituality in the Workplace, as well as his most recent publication, Animal Kingdom of Diversity Fable. Prior to founding the consulting firm Innovations International Incorporated, Dr. Guillory was a physicist and a chemist of international renown. He's presented or facilitated at more than 4,000 seminars at Fortune 500 companies and organizations around the world. Dr. Guillory, it is a pleasure meeting you. Welcome.
It's a pleasure meeting you. Thank you, Kat.
Now, I need to get started because we've got a lot of ground to cover here today. My first question is this. As I brought out in the introduction, many people are talking about spirituality and religion in the workplace. And I'm curious what has occurred in our society to spark these conversations at this time?
Yeah, I think it's a culmination of a number of events which have been happening for the last 5 or 10 years. First and foremost is work-life balance. And that's an issue that's been around for about 15 years and really is not solved at the present time. It forces people to ask themselves some fundamental questions about what's really important at the depths of my being for what I want to do with my life, and we'll talk more about that. The second is values alignment. People are beginning to ask themselves, how do my personal values align with the organization's practice values, not the ones they publish? Another one is work as meaning. If I'm going to be putting in this time and effort, is there something that I do that drives me with passion? And passion is spiritually derived. Well, these are just a couple of the questions which have sort of culminated in people's thinking. It's something like Victor Hugo's statement, spirituality is an idea whose time has come.
And I always love to begin conversations with definitions, just to give us a base here.
Yeah.
What is your definition of spirituality and your definition of religion?
Yes. Well, spirituality for me is something that which comes from within, beyond what we've been programmed to believe or value. It's something that goes to our inner selves, and something we've all experienced perhaps often in our lives, and people have practiced to learn how to do it. Religion to me is more or less an organized system of beliefs that people have, that they look for meaning in their lives and they derive value from. As I've done seminars on the subject, people use words for spirituality like abstract, and for religion like concrete. They will use words for spirituality that oneness, inner self, universe, world, and most of all connectedness. And whereas they talk about religion as being something much more specific, much more defined, much more something that's concrete, I can see, feel, and touch it.
I really like the definition that you have of spirituality, that which comes from within. Why then is spirituality an important part of workplace functioning? I think I know what the answer is, but I want to hear you talk about it.
Well, I think if we're truly spiritual beings having a human experience, then it follows us, or it's a part of us all the time, everywhere. And the question is, do we get a chance to manifest it in ways that are natural to us? And some of the most important ways that we manifest it, I call expressions of spirituality, go far beyond religion itself. It involves creativity, meditation, support, compassion, inspiration, tai chi, insight, patience, empowerment. And I wanted to give a list so that people really get a sense of how wide-ranging and how comprehensive and in-depth the word means. And you can see it in a much broader scope. It begins to encompass what one would call one's spiritual values and goes on with passion, vision, courage, respect, imagination, and ultimately love. these are all expressions of spirituality, and you can see that coming from our inner self, it has a wide view, has a wide variety of applications.
Are there different approaches, I'm curious, to spirituality for those who say, and I'm sure you've run into folks like this before, keep religion and personal issues at home. But if you look at that list, as you say, that's within you. So you really can't keep it at home.
That's correct. That's correct. What we find is that the luxury of keeping that part of ourselves at home not only robs the organization, because as I've indicated, that's where creativity, inspiration, and all those other features, all those characteristics we'd like to see people manifest in the workplace in a natural way. I think of spirituality is, wisdom is associated with spirituality, and I think knowledge is associated with the mind. And so we begin to see that there are different realms of operation, and we want to be natural with other people and bring out the best we can. The other problem is that we've lost the luxury of people leaving their personal selves at home. And that's why we've developed over the last 10 years employee assistance programs. Programs for people who are having difficulties with their lives in terms of finances, in terms of psychological difficulties, in terms of family difficulties, elder care, etc., because we realize we need the whole person in order to do the work we need.
Now, are there different approaches to understanding spirituality in the workplace? And I'm thinking specifically if I'm a student at a university.
Okay.
And I wonder if my perception of spirituality should be different than if I'm employed by a major Fortune 500 company.
Yeah. What they both have in common is it involves tapping into one's inner self. So they both have that in common. Some years ago, before I left the university, I used to teach a course. And it was for honors students or anybody else who wanted to come. It turned out I had 100 people in the course. And the way I set the course up was I had 7 papers that people had to write on. And it was like, what is consciousness? What is the difference between the brain and the mind? My instructions were, I don't want you to do any research in the library. I don't want to know what dead people think about it. I want to know what you think about it. If you wake up in the middle of the night and you write the whole paper in 15 minutes, that's what I want. If you're driving on the freeway and you drive off the freeway and you have this flash, this insight, that's what I want. If you have to pore over it or study it, that's not what I want. And the statement I got from the students at the end of that course, you know, you've ruined us forever. and so that's the kind of thing that really assists a student in understanding what it means to serve, what it means to look at what they're learning in a course of study and say how it applies to society in general. What can I do in behalf of society? How can I give back? I think that should be an integral part of the whole academic process. Now, if you're already employed, then the question is, how do I interact with people around me in authentic ways? So if I'm coming from that inner source in terms of how I behave with other people, how I support other people, how I team with other people, then what happens basically is that the attention to myself shifts to other people. And I start to think about service. And it's a staggering kind of realization I get, how much I get back from being that way.
That's fascinating. So everything comes from within.
Yes. It all starts there. And from that authentic part, you know, not the mental part, the authentic part within. We've all had that experience. It's just that we don't know how to access it on a regular basis. And by having this subject of spirituality now become an active part, a formal part of the workplace, that new dimension can be brought into the workplace, which never existed. I'll just say one thing and move on.
Yes.
On average, most people in the workplace operate about 60% of their efficiency. So where's that other 40%? That other 40% is what we're talking about today.
Oh, wow, this is fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
Good beginning here. We're going to keep talking, obviously.
Okay.
We're still with Dr. Bill Guillory here this morning. My next question is this. You have a great definition of spirituality. So I'm curious, what exactly is meant by spirituality in the workplace?
Yeah, that's a good question. I define it as the uncompromised integration of humanistic values with sound business practices and principles. In other words, the two are inseparable in practice. The basic idea is how do we do that in a way that that illustrates to our audience or to people in the workplace how it's done. The first thing I think of is ensuring an inclusive and caring workplace. And by having that kind of workplace, It's really the most difficult aspect of a whole diversity program, to really have people feel wanted, valued, and appreciated as part of the workplace. The second I think of is ensuring equity of opportunity. As I go through this list, I want to give real specific examples, but I want people to understand that when they're practiced in a way that there's zero tolerance for discrimination and other kinds of things like that, that's what I mean by uncompromised. Now, that uncompromising nature comes from that inner self that I'm talking about. It's the CEO who takes a stand and says to people when there are arguments or when there's resistance to the fact that, you know, I'm not sure I want to do this. It's just do it because I say do it. And if you don't do it, this is not the place to work. Now, he or she might not say it in that fashion, but that's the message which gets communicated. Another is supporting the empowerment or the performance of other people. To support the empowerment of someone is to try and bring out the full expression of the human spirit. That's, again, spiritual in nature. Treating others with dignity and respect is another one. Facilitating the growth, learning, and well-being of other people. Ensuring an environment of work-life quality balance, and I'm going to introduce the term integration in just a minute, which means it's artificial to try and separate our personal lives and professional lives today. If you have a cell phone, you've made yourself available after work, automatically.
True.
Being driven by a passion for what we do. Passion is spiritually sourced. Embracing equally all religions. That's something we're going to talk about in just a minute. And that's a test of human tolerance. There's a three-part kind of strategy I use from traveling around the world. And it can be used generally in any kind of workplace where you have a lot of differences. Number one is to be humble rather than arrogant. That's the first and most important one. The second is a willingness to learn rather than teach. It's like I'm willing to listen rather than talk. The third is a willingness to change as a result of what I've learned. If a person just carry those three little nuggets, I call them nuggets of wisdom, in your back pocket, it's amazing how you can adapt to any group, to any place, to any country in the world. People recognize that. Starting off with that number one, how can I be humble about my experience of what I'm going through here with new people and new situations. And the last, being a difference in someone's life. You know, I use that term, be a difference. And hopefully I'll make a difference. I'm always a little bit suspicious of people who start off by making a difference, because it sounds like me there's an agenda already in place. There's a place that I know where I want people to be, and it's a matter of how do I get them there, as opposed to maybe if I am a difference, I can discover what it is they want and where they would like to be. Real critical difference, because it begins to drive how we behave immediately in that interaction with those individuals. And the last is to unconditionally commit to another person's health, happiness, and success, which is the essence of service. And these are examples of what it means to be spiritual in the workplace.
Boy, it is hard in this day and age to unconditionally commit to somebody else when we have kind of this me-first society in a sense.
Yeah. But, you know, if you think about people who you care a lot about, I think of a grandparent-grandchild relationship. That's one of the most unconditional ones, you know, like they bring the kid in with muddy shoes on the white rug, or your mom will take care of that. Don't worry about that. Or you knock the milk over. Or they're understanding. So,
you know, what is the value of spirituality to the functioning of a workplace? At the beginning of our conversation, I mentioned this briefly. Do its practices contribute to workplace productivity and performance? And if so, how do you measure something like that?
Yeah. You know, I said earlier that on average, workplaces put out, in terms of productivity, about 60%. And the question is, how do we shift the distribution to a higher number? It's my premise that the best way to make a profit is to produce your product or service in the most efficient and effective way so that you create a profit by the time it hits the door. And then you don't have to play sales games with it afterwards. So that's recovered productivity from people. There's a book that's been written called The Heart of Business by a fellow named Kostenbaum. And he estimates that about 80% of all the lost processes in organizations are due to interpersonal interactions. And when you bring in differences, you have the potential for greater breakdown. What a lot of us don't understand is that whether we recognize that diversity differences are there or not does not mean that they're not playing out counterproductively. We're simply unconscious to them. And the second part is they're never neutral. So this really is conversations. How do you recover that other 40% that we seem to be losing? And I can just mention a couple of areas. One is expanded creativity. The second is ethical awareness, and that is looking out for other people rather than looking out for ourselves, or the way we interact with customers. Work-life integration. I'm going to explain that in just a minute when we get to one of the skits later on. Quality relationships. Again, now I'm back to this breakdown. In my seminars and presentations, what I try to indicate to each individual in the seminar that you are a small profit or loss center. It's not the people making the decisions up above. And quite often they're no more smarter than you anyway. But if you took a ledger every day and say, now, this is what I did today, and this is what they pay me, and you just try to look at yourself as a small entrepreneur within the organization and look at whether you're a profit or loss center, you begin to see that every interaction that you have in the workplace is making money or losing money. And that's what I try to really enforce on every individual, because that's where the profit and loss is made in terms of internal productivity. And we can go on with some other examples like passionate performance, quality customer relationship and service, greater cooperation, collaboration. We're on the edge of the next paradigm in business, which is the paradigm of connectedness. The attitude of the Lone Ranger won't cut it anymore in terms of business success. There are major ways we have to learn how to operate: cooperation, collaboration, and cross-functional networking. Cross-functional networking is the most powerful phenomenon around that starts to break down or destroy in a very short period of time silos. What keeps a silo in place? A silo is in our head. It's not in the organizational structure. And if we can start to exchange with the most valuable commodity we have, information and knowledge, with each other and not hoard it from each other, then all of that melts away, and that's what we're going to have to learn how to do. Another is talent retention, increased productivity, connects and integrates religious groups, and greater empowerment. Those are all ways that we actually begin to see something happen in terms of monetary value coming from what I'm talking about.
This is very interesting stuff. I mean, I'm curious, has anyone done studies on how to measure increased productivity when we start talking about some of these aspects?
Yes. There are two major measurements you can make in terms of how you're functioning. One is a typical survey, but it has to be a performance-oriented survey, not an employee satisfaction survey. So for surveys I'm speaking of, talk about responsibility, accountability, teamwork, how values play in, what the organizational support system is like, what is the support I get from my manager. All of those aspects having to do with the business, including strategic awareness. And now you can get a measurement and a baseline. The second is, if you have an annual budget a year, I tell people, take your annual budget, and what you do is to figure out how you can only use 80% of it, and you become a profit center yourself. Take that 20% and invest back into the development of your own people. And now you begin to see a monetary value coming from it. From an overall organizational perspective, what you begin to see at the end of the year, by integrating these measures in, is that you begin to produce your products and services at a much cheaper rate. You actually begin to see the numbers as you march through each of the quarters.
How can we explain this from a spiritual perspective?
It's a good question. First and foremost, we have to understand that work-life quality begins with being clear about what's important to us. We somehow think it's the organization's responsibility to create quality for us. That's not possible. So the first thing we have to do is to ask ourselves from that innermost space, what I call our spiritual values, what's most important. As I think about that question for myself, I think about my two daughters. And I just say right off, my children. I don't try to think of esoteric terms like integrity, honesty, and a list that somebody has designed for me. I just say very practical things. And then what I do is connect activities with those. The park, swings, computer games, movies where I hold hands with them and I hug them, and of course shopping.
Yeah.
And the next thing I think of is my work, and that's empowerment. How I interact with people and innovations, with Volunteers of America and other kinds of things that I do to bring out the best in people without appealing to their victimhood. And so I list those things like that and say what's important to me. The important thing about the list is after you make them, you have to select not more than 4 or 5 of those items. And now you begin to see what balance is about. Most people will have a list that's about 10 items. And the first thing I say, you don't get to have all 10. That leads to overwhelm. You get 5. The next thing is now that I've prioritized my list, as in that scenario we just saw,
yes,
she has to make a decision. And notice that none of these things have involved the organization yet. They're all internal decisions I have to make. And that's where the whole process begins. The decision she has to make is based on these 5 things that I've selected. How am I going to design my life now? And what is the impasse? And obviously the impasse is her commitment to her work as compared to the commitment her family. And the way she's playing it out, the two are mutually exclusive. And that's an illusion. So she has to make a decision that she can't change. She can't save the world. Something like that. And start to focus on what's going to happen if I stay on the course that I'm on. So that once that critical decision is made, then she can say, now I know how to design my life. Now I go to the organization and say, this is what I need as support. What organizations are trying to do now are 2 things. One is if we can design an endless array of support programs, we'll finally figure out what people need to be successful. The next is the magic bullet called time. And time oftentimes is not the solution. So that's the stepwise process of really getting out of this whole thing and giving the organization a clear indication of what it is I really need to bring the kind of quality and balance to my life. And the last step in the process is the recognition that the neat little separation called personal and professional has never been a reality. And it won't be a reality going into the future. And that is what we call work-life integration.
That's very interesting. We've been talking about spirituality, you know, in terms of employees, but I'm wondering, what about other individuals? I'm thinking vendors specifically, and customers too.
Yeah. Vendors, the first thing I think of is the word ethical. When I'm doing something for a customer, do I cut corners? If I'm designing a workbook for a customer or some kind of service, and I know there's a mistake somewhere, it's a small mistake in a big book with thousands of words. Just the other day, we were doing some work with a law firm, and there was one sentence where one word was spelled wrong in the whole workbook. And each workbook cost us about $35 to do, $35, $40. And I had them print 100 workbooks over again because of that one mistake. I was really not trying to correct the mistake. I was trying to teach a lesson about what I expect in terms of quality in the organization, so that every breakdown, every mistake can be an opportunity to teach a principle of how things operate. Now, that drive for quality is not something of a mental aberration that I have. It's something that I think I owe to another of ourselves permission to do. So the organization does not have the power to keep us from being creative. I want to establish that right away. However, they can also create an environment where...
Tell us what you saw from your perspective.
Yeah, it's a very interesting one. As you know, I used to be on a campus a large part of my life. The first thing, I think it should have been in reverse. I think the department chair should have been leading the charge, particularly in this day and time. And it should be the faculty member being pulled into something in terms of multiculturalism. It's a reality. We're approaching 1/3 the population of the United States being people of color, not counting people from Eastern Europe and different kind of cultural groups. And that's showing up everywhere. So that the argument for doing something like this is 10 years old in my own opinion. Secondly, is when these classes are given, I think they should move from an intellectual kind of academic approach to something that starts to give an experiential nature of self with respect to these things. Because the first thing that college students transition into the world of work, they have to be retaught again, they have to be retrained. And the first thing they train them in is in the subject of diversity, in real diversity that they're going to be experienced. And I think it's just like the university looking at itself as, I'm providing a product for my customer called the business world or whatever world they go to. And so there are some basic things that I think universities and colleges might think about in terms of how do we start to create an environment where we understand that multiculturalism and diversity is an inherent part of the human experience. And it's an inherent part of what we do here, not a department over there that does it. And number one is the president and academic leadership are responsible for the environment that exists. It starts off with, we are the culture. We promote the culture. We might have inherited it, but we are responsible for where it's supposed to be and where it's supposed to go. Number two is ensure an inclusive and caring environment by some rigorous measurement process. Several years ago, we did a cultural survey for an academic institution. Explore, discuss, and integrate the humanitarian, environmental, and ethical dimensions of course presentations. So if I'm a chemist, I talk about global warming. I talk about not the phenomenon simply as a chemical kind of experiment going on in the atmosphere, but what the impact can be. So that I think it should be brought to that level. We're training people to operate in a world, not to be robots. And I'm not saying that this doesn't go on. I'm just sort of bringing out what should happen if it isn't. I think we institute diversity learning as an academic requirement, just like physical education, including the experiential discovery of self, not just a head game. Mm-hmm. And lastly, to teach what it means to serve others. So those are some ideas that I think we really need to integrate.
Let's go back to really explore here leadership. How can leaders promote spirituality in the workplace?
Okay. I think first and foremost is to have a conversation with whomever they need to, or maybe look at some of those first skits up there where and come to the reality that it is already here. It is a part of what we do. We might not have been paying attention to it. We have the harbingers, and if we ignore it, then it will show up as an explosion. So recognize that there is a need for spirituality in the workplace. The second is to take the lead in establishing a spirituality employee group. The third is to participate in initial meetings for setting the direction. I think leadership should be intimately involved in the whole process in initial stages because it's such a high-stakes game. Define their role and be an example to the organization, and finally to ensure an inclusive and holistic approach to spirituality. I'll talk more about how to set up groups in a minute, but I think that's exactly the role that leadership.
How to create and sustain a workplace employee spirituality group.
Yeah, that was a perfect example. As a matter of fact, the most important thing is the approach going to be a fragmented model, or is it going to be a holistic model? And talk about all the things we've been discussing so far, and they were taking a holistic model, and the process they were going through is absolutely perfect. The only thing missing was planned facilitation up front. There's no other way to get through forming the kind of team they're trying to be without what they did. In fact, if they didn't do that, they'd be faking it. All right. So the first thing is to distinguish between religion and spirituality, and that may take several meetings. And find out if they are the same. And maybe in some organizations they will be synonymous. I doubt it when they do that. And once they see that, they see spirituality is kind of overarching and includes many of the aspects that people are doing in piecemeal way right now. The second thing to do is to define the purpose in terms of organizational success and employee well-being. Those two criteria have to be applied to almost anything we do as a team. The third is establish an initial multicultural, multi-religious group to work with leadership for exploration. As I said before, some body or some persons from leadership needs to be involved in that conversation because the stakes can be high. And a very, very important term, because I don't think we have a good idea of what that means, where people feel wanted, appreciated, and valued. And I can walk into this organization and I feel like I belong. And most of all, to feel a sense of pride for the organization that I work for.
I've so enjoyed our conversation, the two of us here, and we're going to have a question and answer session in just a second. Welcome back. We've just concluded a very interesting discussion on spirituality in the workplace with Dr. Bill Guillory, and now we want to hear what you have to say. We have a lot of questions here, Dr. Guillory. This is a good one. This is a clarification, I think, kind of a question from one of our viewers. From your presentation, it appears that religion is not the dominant piece of spirituality, but that it is personal and cultural values. Is that accurate?
I would say yes. That it is when you when you look at the wide-ranging dimensions and subjects which are covered as a spiritual expression that plays out in the workplace, it is one. Depending on the organization, it might or might not be very important. To say dominant, as in the sense of being the only one, it is not.
Okay. We have a question from Kathy, one of our viewers. She says, as a leader in a government agency, because of the separation of church and state mandate, how do you allow for spirituality in the workplace without the religious practices coming into play? An example, having to allow Muslims to pray at work 3 times a day, giving Jewish people their religious holidays off in addition to Christmas, allowing for everyone's special holiday, or cultural foods being brought and shared at employee potlucks.
Yeah. I think the most important aspect of spirituality in the workplace is how individuals behave, where their behavior is driven from, and do they have an intent to support, to serve the organization, and to contribute to the well-being of other people. And so the most important, what I call best practice in spirituality, actually does not require the organization's permission. It really is, how do you become a creative, contributing, useful, and supportive human being more than anything else. And if a religious practice comes into play under that designation, that has 2 criteria attached to it. One is that it contributes to the organization's success and it contributes to that person's personal and professional well-being, then I can't see how it can be harmful. Okay.
So you don't worry about the mandate, especially for governmental agencies, about the mandate between separation of church and state?
No, I think it's kind of a gray anyway. How do you start to really, if a religious belief is that you serve and contribute to other people, that doesn't have to be religious necessarily. So that unless there is something which is blatant in terms of a religious practice that is espoused by a certain religion, I think just being normal and being natural yourself will work out.
Here's another call-in question. Yeah. How do you incorporate and develop a spiritual environment in a college setting across all areas?
Yeah, across all areas. I think it has to start at the top, unquestionably. Like I indicated earlier, the most important thing is that the president of the institution or whoever is running the institution begins to see that spirituality is an important part of what we want our curriculum to be like. Recently, I was on the board of Westminster College in Salt Lake City, and the president put out an edict about how he wanted these things to be part of the actual teaching curriculum, and then appointed some board members with some faculty members and some academic people to begin to discuss how do we incorporate and integrate these things into what we do. And once it starts to have that kind of blessing, rather than isolated departments are coming from the bottom, or doing a survey and finding out what people like and so forth, it sort of gives you some specific ideas of how you go about implementing it.
As you say, this goes back to leadership.
It always does. Mm-hmm. If it's going to be a cultural transformation, if it's going to be an event isolated in one department, another department, then it has a lifetime. It lives and it dies.
I had a feeling that this topic was going to touch off a lot of questions, and I'm right about it. Another good one here. Can organizations go too far in welcoming spirituality/religion at work? Where's the limit? Should we then also welcome spiritual practices such as Wiccan, Rastafarianism, and a lot of other less known but yet practiced religious or spiritual practices?
Yeah. If it's done in a fragmented way, like most organizations are doing, then it will lead to that kind of difficulty. If for no other reason than to say, no, you can't do that. If it's done in a holistic way, where I outline the steps of setting up some kind of holistic spirituality employee group with leadership's integration, and start to define the subject and start to investigate how does it play out uniquely in our organization, our academic institution, and then start to give it some kind of structure of how it integrates in, then we won't have to worry about the things that were just mentioned.
Now, what about folks who identify as being agnostic or atheist? How do you deal with people like that when you're embracing the idea of spirituality in the workplace?
Yeah, well, these people could perfectly be spiritual. Some people are spiritual and not religious. Some people are religious and not spiritual. Some people are both and some are neither. And so, therefore, everybody, either overtly or unconsciously, has a value system that comes from deep within themselves. And that's the essence of spirituality. So anyone would be invited to be part of that kind of group.
Thank you for these great questions, by the way. How does someone gain support for the idea of the workplace as spiritual? Issues of religion and spirituality can be difficult subjects, as you know, and really easier to evade than address directly.
So what's the question again?
How does someone gain support for the idea?
The support for the idea?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, if you looked at those scenarios, the first two scenarios about things that Breaking Ice illustrated, the truth is those things are happening with greater and greater frequency. As I said before, those are harbingers trying to give us messages about what already exists, as long as we ignore them. So the first step is making a case for it in the first place. Is it present in our workplace? How frequent is it? What is the need for it? How does it impact the work we do? That information is absolutely necessary, first of all, to begin to build a case. And secondly, how does this relate to our workplace performance in terms of the products and services we deliver? And maybe with our customers also, you start to gather that information. Says, this thing is here. It's playing out. And as long as it's playing out and we're ignorant of it, we're losing money. We're running a poor operation. We're not doing what we're supposed to do. And that then gives them the impetus or the motivation to say, okay, we know what's going on. How do we start to provide some structure for how we're going to address this whole thing? And so the thing is information gathering to get some kind of idea of the frequency or what's unique to our organization about why it's happening.
And you would encourage, if someone's watching today, and they're thinking, I am really interested in this, but I'm just one person. I mean, how can I influence a whole corporation?
It's very easy. What I tell people is, you know, what you need to do is to count the number of people that you interact with in a day. Then multiply that times 7, the number of people you interact with in a week. And look at every one of those encounters as a critical moment for a transformational process to occur. Where are you coming from? Do you pay any attention to how someone was impacted by the experience they had of you? Did they go away a different person? So by just living, you might say, in a spiritual way. That's why it's so powerful to understand that spirituality is not something that's external, but is manifested externally, that it really comes from inside me. Every encounter that you have can be a transformational experience. And if you had just a critical mass of people doing that, we wouldn't have need for an affinity group.
And I know folks are watching and they still have some concerns about this, and this is a good question. This is a viewer, and she says, I am concerned about going beyond tolerance and inclusiveness to any form of promotion of religious practice in the workplace. She says, I'm a mediator, but I don't want to mediate at work.
Well, again, all that can be handled with this holistic approach with an actual group, because the group then takes into account all the issues which are occurring, so that the organizational leadership doesn't have to take these things in a piecemeal fashion. Today it's this, today it's food preferences, today it's prayer preferences, today it's this, I need time off for that. If you do it in a fragmented way, it'll drive an organization crazy. And ultimately, they will make a mistake that will make them liable. That is the problem with doing it in that fashion. So that if you have this group which goes through its own cleansing process, becomes a unity of one, and therefore is designed to feel these kinds of things that are occurring in the workplace, to work through them, to come to some kind of accommodation, by the nature of the group itself, that it will have a high probability of working well in the organization. So the most important thing are those last two conversations we had about how do you go about designing a group to actually formally deal with issues that we've been talking about.
Understood.
Yeah. You
mentioned cost. What kind of cost is associated with creating a welcoming environment for spirituality in the workplace?
You know, that's the amazing thing about cultural transformation. It doesn't cost anything. The real cost is how willing are we as individuals to give up our ethnocentric ideas about other people. And that's where the cost comes. And that's what, and most commonly, it is thought that the leadership will transform the culture. That is not so. The employees will transform the culture. The leadership leads the charge, makes sure that they know that is what they want to happen. They're given the resources they need in terms of people, and the least cost is money. The greatest cost is how people will have to change. And basically our approach to change is, how can we change the least amount in the longest period of time and still survive? Mm-hmm. And that won't work here.
I hear you say a lot of this is going to come from the bottom up, but here's a viewer who wants to know, how can an organization help to develop and nurture passion and other expressions of spirituality in individuals?
Yeah, the key is a creative environment. I recently did work with the Imagineering group from Disney, which is the heart and soul of the whole entertainment industry with Disney. And just to work with that group was just fun to sit there and listen to them, and I was being paid for it. And I could tell just from the experience of those 20 people how fun it was just to come to work and interact with each other every day. I think the whole idea of creativity, nurturing it, expecting it, and then putting into practice the ideas in creative ways within a unit starts to create the nucleus for that to happen. You don't need the organization's permission to do this. You don't need any blessing. If you can get the people who you work with every day to make it a fun environment, creativity, personal growth and learning, and sort of giving up our predisposed ways that we think the way life ought to be is the key to that success. Yeah.
You know, have you personally, I always like to ask personal questions.
Sure.
Obviously, we have a viewer who does too. Have you had any difficulty reconciling religion and spirituality as being different?
Long time ago, I was raised Catholic. And for those listening, I was an altar boy, too. I was rejected to the priesthood. I'm just kidding.
I'm Catholic, too. I understand.
And so what I started having was experiences that involved in-depth kind of examination, and started to connect more and more to a spiritual perspective. And that came out of, I spent time on a commune in China with some people in Japan, with a shaman. And my worldview started to expand to appreciate people. And that's where I got those 3 nuggets I talked about earlier. And out of that, a whole new world kind of opened up to me. And I just followed my lead to where I was being taken. And I think my life is more about how do I live every day with respect to people I meet all the time. And I use that as my guide more than anything else.
Have you found it difficult to just kind of let yourself go in that direction? Do you kind of be free to not try to do it on your own? You're kind of being led by something here. Do you find it difficult at first?
Yeah. A very practical example is my own organization. I've always thought of myself as the innovative and creative part of the whole thing, bringing forth new kind of programs. Well, I've been hiring some young, hotshot Gen X and Y people, and they have no respect for anybody who's over 35 or 40 years old. And so I've been allowing more and more of their ideas to come in, and just watch myself, feel this humility that I tell other people to experience. And that's a practical example of how it started to happen to me. And some of the ideas they come up with are truly incredible.
See, speaking of ideas, I'm going to go back here for just a second. This is a question from the Minneapolis Community and Technical College. Mm-hmm. They want you to expand on the open book management practices, some of those ideas.
Yeah. The first thing is when you start to share information, let's see, this is a community college.
Yes.
I would say they have an open environment, but to have an open environment where people go through some kinds of experiential, the more you share information with people, and I call it like nuggets of knowledge. And the way we've done it we haven't done it with any colleges or universities, but we've done it in organizations and corporations where there is a server where people can access information, something like a blog. You start communication across people and so forth where they can't make physical contact anymore, and start to look at all the information you have. So I started going through all the things I had written and started making them publicly available. And started to look at what people were interested in. And out of that sort of selection process of learning that, the more information and the more sharing that went on, the more the environment started to change. It's like the fewer secrets we have, the more people start to trust each other, the more honest we are with each other. And it didn't require physical contact. So that in organizations, what I have is this idea of knowledge management. And some form of knowledge management might be implemented within a department or across the university where you get communication going. I mean, look at what happened on election night, yes, where blogs started to just flow all over the place. In other words, that's trying to give us an indication of how people want to communicate with each other in a very open way, and it starts to create what is the atmosphere here, what is the environment like here, and what is the culture like.
So I got a chuckle out of your comment about your friends in the Generation X and Y age group. And here's a question from our main site. How does the multi-generational nature of today's workplace impact issues like spirituality?
Very, very dramatically. We have 6 generations now for the first time in American society and 5 in the workplace. And they all have different strengths. Like what you would call the senior generation, I didn't say older, senior generation is a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge, a lot of know-how. And the younger generation, you have this enthusiasm, these ideas, and of course with a computer, some kind of technology hooked by the belt all the time. And the idea is to say, what is it we have in common? What is it we're all striving for as part of a unit, whether it's a department, whether it's a whole university structure or a geographical site of a university? Start to look at the commonalities of what we're trying to achieve, and then start to put together some kind of group to tap into those ideas and formalize it in terms of informal programs. The idea is to create the least amount of structure as possible, use as much technology for communication, but start to give a sense of togetherness. And I think the communication links are the most important thing in trying to create that kind of feeling that we're together, whether we have people who are residents, whether we have people who commute, that we're all part of a system. And how you go about doing that then may be unique to each site.
Here's a question from Megan, who's watching today. If a corporation already has multiple employee groups that are religious-based or spiritually-based, Muslim groups, Christian group, etc.,
yeah, are
you advocating that they change their strategy and have only one spiritual employee resource group?
The answer is yes. The answer is yes to that. And the thing to do is to figure out the best way to bring those groups together under one umbrella. So my answer is yes.
Okay.
And if I had a conversation with her, I could tell her more.
But I bet you should get your email address and maybe have a conversation about that.
I look forward to it.
Another good question here, this came to mind as we were talking earlier in the day. Are there certain industries or regions in the country where you're seeing spirituality welcome to the workplace more than others?
I started to say yes, and then I hesitated because I thought of examples of no. You know, there was a recent article in USA Today about how people conceptualize God. And they had 4 different models they came up with. And those models were also related to certain segments of the country. And in the western part of the country, like California, they seem to be most receptive to a more holistic idea of spirituality, something like I'm talking about. But I also thought of examples where it's not the same, but that article gives perhaps the best indication by regions of the country how holistic people think about the subject we're talking about. It was about 3 months back, and I'm sure we can go on the internet and find that article.
A question from MCTC, again, this is our main site. Mm-hmm. How to expand spirituality in the workplace into the world, politically, between nations and so on?
Yeah. That is the perfect question. That is the perfect question. You see, because it goes back to the question that was asked previously. And that is, what we have is a world set up in terms of fragments, and in terms, the model is everybody's out for themselves, even down to the individual level. And what I'm proposing here in this holistic model is that we have to create something new to give an example to the world of what can work in the most constructive way to serve everybody. And this movement is going to be a bottoms-up movement. It will not, there are no leaders that are going to espouse this thing. as far as I can see. And so the whole idea is, how do we come together as individuals and families and in communities and whatever organizations we belong to, and once we start to create that gelling effect, I think it will have the probability of multiplying, particularly if we connect technology with it. So the whole idea is this is going to be a bottoms-up movement if we want to impact the world and not use the kind of polarized model that we have presently in the world. And that will not come from great leaders. This will come from individual leaders throughout the world, broad-based leaders.
If fragmentation is the norm, because we were talking about fragmentation a couple minutes ago, in most areas of our lives, how do we begin to get comfortable and adopt an attitude of integration?
Yeah, yeah. My first response is that is to begin in the book, and I'm not trying to promote my book here, Spirituality in the Workplace. I give 10 examples of how do you begin to introduce spirituality into your life. One is to read some nice soft books on spirituality. There's a book I can think of called Emmanuel's Book, which is a tremendous way to get into it. But it begins with changing myself as a person, beginning to understand some of the ethnocentric tendencies and beliefs that I have strongly held about other people, about other countries, and begin to, as I identify these tendencies in myself, how do I begin through human interaction, which is the workshop of life, begin to release them or begin to give myself a break? And I think to encounter differences in different people is the most provocative way on an individual basis to begin the personal change myself. Now, as soon as I start to change as an individual myself, people will see a different person. They will experience a different person. And that is the greatest impact that I can have. And that's called being a difference. Because while I'm being a difference, I don't have to pay attention to how I create this relationship with Kathy. Now, how do I do this? You know, it's like another expression I use, be interested rather than interesting. Be interested rather than interesting.
I have to remember that in my own life, yeah.
Those kind of little thoughts start to seep in, and you're more interested in listening to people than you are in talking to people. You know, in our educational experience, nowhere are we taught how to listen.
That's true.
Not to memorize stuff that's so-called taught to us, but to really listen and to empathize and to put myself in another person's shoes as to what they're not only saying, but what they're experiencing. And to be able to feel what they're communicating and not saying. All those kinds of techniques, all those kinds of things began with the introspective process, and it just naturally started to occur with another person.
I had a mentor who, on the subject of listening, used to say, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, act accordingly, and listen. I brought up this question a few minutes ago, and this is a question piggybacking off of my rigorous measurement process question here. This is from Steve, the Lutheran campus pastor at Southwest State University in Marshall. One of the keys mentioned for the establishment of the spirituality in the workplace is a rigorous measurement process. Can you describe what such a measurement process might entail? Who and how are measurement criteria to be established?
Yeah, the way we've done it before with campuses is to say, what is it we want to measure? In fact, I put together something called a spirituality survey, and we could start with something like that as a basis. It has about 50 questions in various categories, which is predicated on the topics that I've written in my book. And we start to say now, which questions apply, which questions don't apply, how do we modify certain questions, what are we trying to learn from this survey about the culture, about the organization, about spirituality, given a definition in the front of it, so that rigorous means that it's comprehensive. I did get a couple of people together as a focus group and said, now what do you think the problems are? I actually got together a survey which could be done easily online, and really got some feedback as to what the student and faculty and administrative population thought about how spirituality should be a part of what we do every day. And based on that measurement now, I understand that I have a problem, I have an opportunity, I have a situation I can head off, or I can have several strategies based on the feedback that I get. And to make that kind of measurement as comprehensive as confidential as possible. Mm-hmm. But what I'm talking about is a uniquely designed survey that fits the organization perfectly. That's what I mean by that.
I was glad to have that question from Marshall, Minnesota. This question is from St. Cloud State University. How do we work with those whose religious beliefs are sometimes demeaning or denounce or exclude gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people?
I'm going to answer that question two ways. One, if we're talking about the spirituality group, then that has to be naturally dealt with, the group leading the charge. I think through education, number one. I think through conversation, number two. And I think through experiential processes, number three. Now, how that's best facilitated is another question. And when I talk about education, I mean accurate education, and not stuff that's picked up from here and there. So I think the most powerful workshop, as I said, on the planet is the workshop of life. And that last step is to get to some kind of experiential process. Now, this is not unlike something I haven't gone through myself. I mean, obviously, I discovered some years ago that I was probably the most prejudiced person on the planet. And I wasn't sure whether to be proud of that or disappointed by it. I decided I was disappointed by it. Yeah. And so everything that I try to talk about in diversity forums is based on what I've gone through myself as a person, and experiencing people and asking questions and asking them to help me through what I'm struggling with, because I am struggling with things. These things are, some of them are very hardwired in my reality, and I undo the wiring, and I need help from people, and that's how I kind of open myself to it. But it begins with education. It begins with conversation, polite conversation, and then something experiential.
Good, excellent question here. If embracing diversity involves recognizing and celebrating our differences, doesn't a spirituality group that minimizes individual religious beliefs and practices work against promoting diversity?
I didn't say minimize anything. First of all, what an individual does, I use the word integrate. And integration means that I come together with another group, with other people, and in the process of coming together and creating a unity of one, what I'll discover are some things that are in my reality which are ethnocentric, which are exclusive to my own way of operating, my own way of thinking. And I can't see how anyone would want to hold on to those things. In my person, where's the difference? And so we really... I would expect that there would be a collective outrage in this country. Why aren't we doing something for our country? There's no separation between me and New Orleans. I don't care where I live. And what we have not done is a reflection on us totally as a country, in my opinion.
I have about 30 seconds, and I need to know, how did you go from a career in hard science to your ideas and understanding of spirituality? I know you mentioned your Catholicism.
I remember when I came back from Germany after doing a sabbatical there. I came back to the university, and I was back for 1 week, and I turned in my resignation. And everybody thought I was crazy, and I had to confirm that I was actually crazy, because nobody with sanity would do something like that. I think for me it was traveling to other countries and deciding that while I'm here, I'm not going to become part of an American enclave and protect myself from what this place is like, because if I immerse myself in it, I will not be the same person. And so those travels and that process of really allowing myself to change just expanded, and sometimes I'm afraid to look in the mirror and see who I am today.
Well, this has been a great question and answer session, and I hope you'll do us the favor of leaving us some parting thoughts.
Yeah. I think, let me see my little notepad here.
Yes.
I wanted to make sure I get them. Number one is to see that spirituality is truly an issue, not only in organizations, universities, government agencies, and business, but it's really an issue in the country today, because they are simply reflections of what we experience all the time. Secondly, that the model that we should begin to use is not a fragmented model. We can see it doesn't work. We have to begin to connect and really care about each other. And the way that reflects itself is if I change as a person, if I become a difference, I will make a difference in every encounter that I have. And that's how I change the world.
All right.
Yes.
You know what? Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
And I'd like to thank Dr. Guillory for speaking with us about the very timely topic of spirituality in the workplace. Well, another MCDC Diversity Conference has come to a close. Unfortunately, it was very interesting. I hope that you are able to take the information provided during today's broadcast and use it in your